has it essentially delivered on its pledge? How sustainable can it be, and can it reach the ultimate goal of $1 billion in grants over the next 5 years? So a lot of questions to get to in just a moment as we hear from the affected countries themselves, Jordan and Lebanon, some of the key donors as well here on the stage with me, and main financial development and humanitarian players as well. And it's great to see so many of you here in the audience. I know many of you are watching our live webcast as well. You can also join our live discussion on Twitter using the hashtag GCFF. Send in your questions, comments, ideas, and suggestions, and we'll try to get to them if we can. Toward the end of the hour. Before we begin, I would like, though, to acknowledge the presence of someone here in the audience who is a passionate advocate for refugees and has shown not just a personal but a strong financial commitment as well to addressing the refugee crisis, Mr. George Soros. Thank you very much for being here, for your continued support for this issue, and of course welcome as well to Mrs. Tamiko Bolton. Now here's a quick look, before we begin the discussion, at the Global Concessional Financing Facility, how it started and how it works. I will say that this is probably also why we are talking now so much about the refugee crisis to begin with. But looking at the more immediate concerns for countries in the region, there is, of course, the question of financial resources, but there's also the question of capacity of these countries, like Jordan and Lebanon, to cope, to absorb the impact of such massive influxes. How much of an impact has these refugee crises had on countries like this, and how much has the GCFF been able to help?
Thank you very much for bringing us together, and to all in the audience, very impressive, joining this conversation. This is the evidence of how significant it is. Before I answer your questions, could I ask for the Lebanese and Jordanians in the audience to please raise your hand? Even better, stand up. Well, raise your hand. Let's not make it. What I want to say first is that Lebanon and Jordan, the Lebanese and the Jordanian people, have opened their hearts and their homes to accommodate the victims of a horrible war in the hundreds of thousands. And all we need to do in the rest of the world is just to open our wallets. Is this too much to ask? And in conviction that it is not, we at the World Bank, and actually when that started I was in the European Commission with exactly the same idea, we thought that we have a very significant dual problem to solve.
As part of a series of paradigm shifts that have been taking place in dealing with the crisis. The first one has been a great recognition, and I want to thank Kristalina and everyone and all the donor countries that there has to be a fair burden sharing. The second one is that the biggest donors are actually the host countries hosting the refugees. And this has been a transformation in developmental thinking. And the third part is understanding the time, the scale, and the carrying capacity of host countries in dealing with this crisis. To put this in context, Jordan is hosting today 1.3 million Syrians in total, only half of which, close to the 700,000, are registered refugees. This is about a 14% increase in total population, or a 20% increase in the Jordanian population. 90% of those Syrians, or 80% of the registered Syrians, are outside the camps. And think about then a country now we're in the 7th year, we're growing at 1/3 the rate for 5-6 continuous years. We've have, because of the low growth, less tax revenue. We're incurring more deficits. We're getting debt to GDP to rise faster. Your fiscal space is disappearing. That's on one end. Then you have an increase of about, over the past 5-6 years, 25% in unemployment, a 30% increase in poverty. And that's the context we're dealing with.
Sweden. And we're, of course, a rich country, but we also see that it takes a lot of resources in order to really accommodate all these refugees. And since the world has now a completely unprecedented number of refugees, we need to support, of course, also middle-income countries that take this enormous responsibility. It's really a global good. And we decided, we were here 1 year ago, we decided immediately to support this mechanism. And I think it's really, really fantastic that it delivers. And that the World Bank and the MDBs and the UN and donors together can actually make it possible to do this holistic, let's say, the development opportunity of refugees, because refugees are not only a burden, they also are a possibility and an opportunity to develop an economy of a hosting country, and Sweden is also proof of that.
The percentage is actually the highest per capita in the world. We're talking about 30 to 40% of the population. So this is actually equivalent to more than 100 million people landing in the United States over a period of 3 years. Or just to put it into perspective, that's about 24 to 30 million coming to Canada in 3 years, or 10 million to Germany, and expecting the world to ask Canada or the US or Germany to find them employment opportunities, feed them, give them services, and treat them equally to their citizens. That's a colossal scale. That's a virtual impossibility, and let's face the truth. We're all doing our best to do that. But classical and traditional indicators for refugee situation and for dealing with refugee situations cannot be applied simply to the case of Lebanon and Jordan particularly, because of the sheer scale of the problem. So we need to be creative. We need to go outside the box and find solutions. We have 500,000 youth unemployed. 30% of the youth in Lebanon are unemployed, and 50% of the Syrian youth, that's between 18 and 24 years old, are unemployed. This is a virtual time bomb. This is creating a lot of discontent and major issues at a social level. This is a global problem. It's not a Lebanese problem. The GCFF has been quite generous and quite creative. The donors have been very active and supportive. That has brought a lot of cooperation and visibility to the problem. However, it still falls short of what is needed. We have very ambitious programs and plans for Lebanon to be able to deal with this global situation, but a global situation like this needs a bigger and more aggressive global solution.
People in the room understand the reason why she's not here, but she would really like to have been. The first thing I want to say really is that this is the defining humanitarian crisis of our generation. And one of the things you learn when you deal with a defining crisis is what are the strengths of your existing system and what are the weaknesses of your existing system. And we have learned that there are some important weaknesses of the international community's ability to respond to very large, very long duration new crises. And as Imad Fakouri said, in London last year, we started to put together the building of a better new system, but we only made a start. The defining features of that better new system firstly need to be a strong focus on helping the countries which are bearing this extraordinary burden in new and better and larger scale ways. And having a clear understanding of what the priorities are. If you talk to both the populations of Lebanon and Jordan themselves, or the refugees, the things you hear a lot about are an education for children and employment opportunities, and then, as the Deputy Prime Minister said, the strain on healthcare systems and infrastructure. So you need a strong focus on priorities, but then you need a long-term commitment. So our basic view is the GCFF has made very good progress in the first year. We were pleased to be initial contributors to it, but there are four big things we need to focus on into the next period if we're to really build a better system for the future.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you saw in terms of challenges facing this group of refugees?
Yes, I've been to Jordan, Lebanon, Jordan twice, and Iraq recently. I visited camp, the Zaatari camp, amongst others, and what struck me the most is all the psychosocial support that these people need. Thinking about these women who went through so, there are no names to qualify what they've been through. They've seen their family being killed, they've been raped, so we are working a lot with them on sexual and reproductive health and rights. And through these services, I visited the clinics, and talking with these women, I realized that they definitely need all this support towards SRHR, but they also need so much psychosocial support. That was very touching me. And talking about the children too, they also need friendly child space. To reintegrate school. And it was very amazing to see the community in Jordan and in Lebanon opening the doors of their schools. Making space. I mean, these families are, they accept to have their kids in school only in the morning to give space for the refugees to have their kids in school. This was so generous. And talking with these families, these refugees, you can see that going back to school is getting back to a normal life. This is so important for these families, for these mothers, to feel that they give hope to their kids.
Always done, we will not get to tackle the problem at heart. And you refer to a very different crisis, but I think it's also very relevant to what's going on in Syria, with the people of Syria fleeing to Lebanon, Jordan, but also to Turkey in great numbers. And I think all of us cannot begin to imagine what it means to open your heart and your houses for so many people, as has been said. And so with this in mind, that we need to do something different to be able to make sure that people have a perspective where they are in Lebanon and Jordan, and also make sure that the friendship with their brothers and sisters continues to uphold. We suggested this kind of facility, and yeah, of course, I'm very pleased to see that so many people came together to make it happen. It's also very good that it happened so quickly, but one cannot say that we're already there looking at the issues at hand. So we need to continue to step up, making from $1 or €1 not only 3, but maybe 4, 5, and maybe 10. And so we continue to advocate for this type of creative option. The other thing that we've been doing as Minister for Trade, I thought we also need to make sure that the export of products from countries like Lebanon and Jordan can enter into the EU market more easily than they've been able to do. And we need to make sure that we send expertise to those countries to work with them, assist them on their request to make that happen. So my call is, this is great. It's great that the facility has gone global. It needs to deliver. We see promising results. But we should not get complacent and think that, you know, this is it and that it will then work its way solving the problems. We should really stay very much alert.
Humanitarian development workers as well as peace-building actors. How does the facility fit within this strategy? Perfect. Perfectly well. Shall I move on to the next question? Could you expand?
Sure. I think the facility is a very good example on what we actually would like to achieve by the reform agenda, a new way of working. And we are sitting here all together, representatives from the UN, the World Bank, donors and partners. And this is actually what the new way of working is about. That we should build the bridge between the different partners in our work, and we should build the bridge between short-term humanitarian assistance with long-term development. And This is exactly what the financing facility is all about. It's about securing or saving lives, and it's about building futures. This is what I see the facility is actually addressing. And we need to do more. But the way it's structured, I think it's actually delivering on what we would like to see as the reform agenda, also covering other parts of our work.
But how?
I think that taking one small step back, you're inviting me to do that. This is my second time to come to the spring meetings. And both last year and this year, obviously the issue of forced displacement is central to the discussion. And it is not just central to a discussion, but it has given space for the creation of an important practical financial instrument that we've been discussing today. Now, let me speak from the perspective of the UN Refugee Organization. This is an extraordinary game changer, as Kristalina said at the beginning, and I want to take this opportunity to recognize the leadership of President Kim and of the World Bank in giving us the opportunity to move on towards a new way of working. So that is very significant. The second point I want to make is that it is important to stay the course. Obviously, we haven't gone into details. There's a lot more, everybody has said it, that needs to be done in utilizing this precious new instruments. We need to see how many more children have actually gone to school thanks to the instruments, how many have got access to the labor market. There's a lot of teething problems. And whilst we get there, we need to continue also to do humanitarian assistance in the traditional way. It's the marriage between the two that matters. Humanitarian organizations for the 5 years of the Syria crisis have mobilized $10 billion. This is not nothing. The problem is that they're not sufficient to tackle the long term, the education and health and infrastructure and economic problems.
And this is very much the value system by which Jordan subscribes to as being an active member of the international community. I think the key messages here for us is this collective burden sharing, all of us together. But we are still at the very beginning of a new approach. This approach is fragile. Staying the course means we need to make sure we invest more in it. If we are, and the international community are reciprocally producing the commitments and the paradigm shift that is needed. If we don't invest sufficiently in it, if we don't fund sufficiently the Jordan response plan, the Lebanon response plan, we will not create the success story that then can get replicated going forward. And this model and this facility is part of a much bigger holistic approach. It's an approach that looks at the carrying capacity of the countries that are hosting the refugees, links trade, investment, job creation, building up the capacity without asking host countries, which would be illogical and no country in the world would do that, to actually do more to refugees when it becomes at the expense of its own citizens. We are way poorer than many of the donor countries sitting here, and they can do this with all their resources in their own countries. So this is a point that has to be factored in this formula. Stay the course, invest in these nascent models, let's get them to succeed sufficiently, and then we can continue pushing the elimination of these divides between humanitarian and development and create the success stories that will encourage others to do the same and probably cost us much less down the road when we try these new approaches.
Between governments and the private sector. Your final thoughts.
As has been said, we need more donors on board. And I really hope that should there be any donors represented here, that they will come and join us. So we need more donors on board. And when it comes to the new way of working, I really think that this is a good example. The financing facility is a good example, as I said, on how we should work also in the future regarding our overall cooperation between humanitarian short-term assistance and long-term development. And this is a good example of this. And when it comes to new way of working, girls have been mentioned, the gender issue has been mentioned, and I really think that when we are building the bridge between humanitarian assistance and development in refugee crisis, we can make sure that girls actually not only get to school, but they are also staying in school, and that they fulfill school and that they are not leaving school. We have a good opportunity when we manage to build this bridge between humanitarian and long-term development assistance.